On the 29th of May 1953, Tenzing Norgay and Edmund became the first people to reach the summit of Mount Everest after several decades of unsuccessful and often deadly expedition attempts. Standing on the highest point of the planet, they shook hands, embraced, and took photos. Norgay left an offering of food to the mountain, and Hillary left a crucifix given to him by the leader of the expedition, John Hunt. After 15 minutes, they started their slow descent back down the mountain, where they were greeted with huge fanfare. Everest had finally been conquered. But leading up to their triumph, many people died or became sick attempting to reach the summit, and in the 70 years since, many more have fallen prey to the dangers Everest presents. Since 1977, at least one climber has been confirmed to have died scaling Everest every year, except 2022, when expeditions were stopped because of COVID-19. Natural disasters, such as avalanches, are becoming more frequent as the Earth's temperature rises, making the ice that covers the mountain more unstable. Tragically, in 2014, an avalanche led to the deaths of 16 people, mainly Sherpa guides, and was, at the time, the highest number of deaths on Everest in one day on record. However, only 1 year later, an earthquake in Nepal devastatingly caused thousands of deaths, including 24 on Everest after the earthquake caused several avalanches, beating the record for deaths in one day once again. Altitude sickness is another common cause of illness and death on Everest, leading to part of the ascent to the summit being labeled the death zone. When more than 8,000 meters above sea level, the oxygen in the air is so limited that the body uses oxygen faster than it can replenish it. This puts climbers at risk of heart attacks and strokes, even with oxygen supplies. Not only that, but a lack of oxygen impairs the brain's judgment, leading climbers to make riskier decisions or not think carefully about where they're putting their hands and feet as they attempt to haul themselves up the jagged rocks. It doesn't help that the mountain's ever-growing popularity and the limited number of days each year that the weather is suitable for climbing Everest is causing long queues to reach the summit, increasing the time that climbers have to spend in the death zone. One Everest climber, David Carter, called the death zone a living hell. Quote, "The only way to describe it is an utter exhaustion. You really don't care if you die or if you just sit down and don't go any further." Of course, as with any ascent up a mountain, common injuries also put people at risk. Just as you could twist an ankle or trip and fall and become incapacitated on a smaller mountain like Snowdon in Wales, you could find yourself doing the same while scaling Everest. The difference is that Snowdon's height and accessibility makes mountain rescue much easier than on a mountain where you're exposed to some of the harshest conditions on the planet. And when you're at such a high altitude, exposed to the elements and stuck in a queue of fellow climbers all wanting to stake their claim on the summit, you're at serious risk of frostbite, a condition where the skin freezes after being exposed to extremely low temperatures. When you have frostbite and the urgent medical help you need is a multi-day descent down a treacherous mountain, you can very quickly become septic as the condition progresses, tissue dies, and infections develop. With so many ways your body can succumb to the challenges of Everest, it's no surprise that so many people have died attempting the climb. But what may be surprising is how obvious the risk of death is as people ascend the mountain, as they pass through what is now known as Rainbow Valley. Just under the death zone of Everest is what has become a graveyard of over 300 bodies, often seen peeking out of the snow and ice, wearing bright, multicolored mountaineering gear, giving the area its name. These bodies are left scattered on the mountain as it's too dangerous to attempt to recover them and take them back to their families. Sometimes the deceased are there because they've wandered or even fallen off the path, and sometimes because another climber had to move the body from blocking the trail. The most well-known body left on Everest is referred to as Green Boots. The unidentified deceased climber is named after the bright green mountaineering boots he was wearing, which were once clearly visible from an alcove cave on the north side of Everest, 8,500 meters above sea level. There is debate over whose the body is, with the most prominent theory being that it belongs to an Indian climber called Siwang Paljor. Paljor was wearing green boots when he attempted the summit in '96. He and several other climbers were caught in a blizzard near the mountain's summit. Once the blizzard passed, half of the group decided to descend back to camp, while Paljor and 2 others chose to climb to the top, which they did successfully, leaving offerings much like Norgay did 40 years before them. However, none of them made it back to camp. Others believe that Green Boots was another member of this group who failed to return, Dorje Marup. Whoever's body it is, all 3 tragically perished after achieving their summit, and all 3 are forever left on the mountain. In 2006, another climber, David Sharp, died next to Green Boots. His death is controversial, as several other mountaineers passed a dying Sharp without saving him. There are conflicting beliefs over whether or not Sharp could have been saved, with some saying he should have been more thoroughly checked over when people reached him, and others saying his fate was sealed and it would have only led to more deaths if people had stopped to help him down the mountain. In fact, some who passed him while ascending believed he had already died, only to realize when they passed him again later that he was alive and seriously unwell. Several climbers did attempt to assist him with food, water, and oxygen, but found themselves running low on oxygen or unable to move him more than a few steps. He eventually passed away, and his body was moved from sight in 2007. In what might be seen as a callous twist of fate, Green Boots' body became a well-known landmark and identifiable point on the north route up Everest, becoming a common place to stop and take a break. The cave is also littered with discarded oxygen bottles, where climbers have stopped to change their gear. However, in 2014, members of a Chinese expedition moved the body to a spot more out of sight of the trail, just as Sharp's body had been. Another well-known body on Everest is nicknamed Sleeping Beauty, which is the body of Frances Arsentiev. She was the first US woman to summit Everest without supplementary oxygen, an incredibly dangerous challenge most mountaineers wouldn't attempt. She and her husband Sergei achieved their goals and reached the summit on the 22nd of May 1998. However, when descending back to camp, they became separated and only Sergei made it back. Realizing she was missing, he ascended back up the trail with medicine and oxygen. A group of Uzbek climbers attempted to assist her down the mountain, giving her oxygen and carrying her, but had to abandon her once their oxygen ran out. The next morning, she was found by more climbers in the same spot, with some of her husband's equipment beside her. 2 climbers abandoned their own summit attempt to try and save her, but unfortunately, they too could not move her in the dangerous conditions at that altitude. She passed away lying on her side, still visible from the summit path. Sergei's body was discovered a year later, appearing to have fallen to his death in his attempt to rescue his wife. 9 years later, Sleeping Beauty was dropped to a lower location to remove it from view. Despite the constant reminders of the dangers they face as climbers ascend past Rainbow Valley to the summit of Everest, every year hundreds of people pay tens of thousands to attempt it, putting their lives and the lives of their Sherpa guides at risk. The population of Rainbow Valley will only continue to grow as long as expedition attempts continue, as the trail becomes more treacherous each year with increasingly unstable ground and long queues forming at the top. One must ask, is it worth it?